Appeal in the matter of JC Bamford Excavators Ltd and Manitou UK Ltd and another.
Yes, Mr. Silverleaf, good morning.
The Lord and the Lady. This is, I hope, a simple appeal. It won't be the most intellectually taxing task that you've had to perform recently. I appeal for the appellant. As I'm sure you know, the appellant and the respondents have settled their differences, and because this is an appeal about validity of the patent, the controller is represented by Ms. Stewart.
Yes.
Before we start, just to make things absolutely clear, the controller is entirely correct in paragraphs 11 and 12 of his skeleton that we're not running the point that the prior art does not disclose a longitudinal load moment control, usually abbreviated to LLMC.
Yep.
Just for good order and discipline, it doesn't in our submission, but it's not necessary to determine that issue in order for the appeal to succeed. So we've therefore simplified the case to the second point, whether the LLMC in the prior art is disabled when the machine is moving. That's the only point that is in issue. The short answer is that it isn't. It continues to operate at all times, and the judge was wrong to hold otherwise. As you know, the substance of my case is the judge had evidence from both experts that the load moment control system in the prior art actually operates when the machine is stationary and when it's moving. He had to reject that evidence. I'll put it this way. He didn't appreciate that that was the evidence from my expert, and he considered that although the defendant's expert agreed with me when I put it to him that was the case, he didn't understand what he was agreeing. As I hope I can show you very briefly, he understood perfectly what he was agreeing, and he was right. We therefore say that as a consequence, the prior art doesn't render the claims of the 965 patent. Yes. Now, bearing in mind the injunctions we've received from the court, I'm going to assume you've all at least skim-read the skeletons. And
I think you can assume we've read the skeletons, which gives us at least the beginnings of an idea of the appeal.
Yes. So I'm going to take it reasonably quickly. If at any point I'm going so fast that you don't follow me, please just pipe up and I'll slow down and go back, whatever. The case is about industrial machines called telehandlers.
Yes.
They are machines for lifting and moving a variety of loads. They're widely used in the building and agricultural industry, and they were developed from forklift trucks in the 1970s. A typical telehandler has a chassis with 4 wheels, an extendable lifting arm pivoting from the rear of the chassis, cab where the driver sits. The lifting arm can be raised and lowered and extended, so the machine can be used for carrying, it can be driven about, loaded, it can be, the arm can be raised, it can be extended, it can be used for lifting up onto high points. There are a number of elegant illustrations of this. One of the nicest ones is in the judgment, tab 6 of the appeal bundle, the court bundle. Page 1, page 46 of the bundle, you will see a picture of a Komatsu telehandler. It's an absolutely typical machine. You see the pivoting of the arm at the back end of the machine, the cab where the driver sits. The arm is now, on this one, is extended and raised because it's being used to lift, I think it's a work platform up to a great height to work on the top of the building there. And you will also see that in this particular instance, the machine isn't resting on its wheels at the front, it's resting on stabilizers, which are almost universally supplied with these machines. So you can either run the machine so that it's driving about on its wheels or even stationary on its wheels, or for extra stability, you put the stabilizers down and the machine is locked to the, not locked, but much more firmly supported on the ground than it would be on its tires.
Do telehandlers also have an ability to rotate?
No, that's
no.
The whole point is a telehandler only goes up and down. And just to jump ahead, the reason for the reason why the telehandler control system, typically the traditional telehandler control system, is simple, is because the only moment of tilt that you can generate directly on a telehandler is forwards, because as the load, you will appreciate, as the load goes forward of the front axle or the stabilizers, the machine becomes more and more tending to tip because the load on the rear axle reduces. So the standard method is you have a load sensor on the rear axle, and you have it set so that when the load drops below a threshold level, you prevent the machine from moving into any configuration which would increase the forward tipping moment. Absolutely standard, been there for years. The earlier 065 patent that the judge held was invalid, had a rather elegant additional system where when the machine is approaching the tipping threshold, it forces the operator to slow down the movement to reduce the inertial shock when the arm finally stops. Again, you will have seen that the industry is, unsurprisingly, because these machines are capable of being extremely dangerous if misused, carefully regulated. There are regulations dealing with the requirement to ensure that the machine cannot go into an unstable position. And if we just flick forward to page 49, where the judge is dealing with the common general knowledge, you'll see a load chart. And this is absolutely typical and is mandated by the statutory instrument BS 1459, BSEN 1459. As the machines, you don't actually need to know any of this, but just to give you a bit of flavour of the background, the core regulation requires machine stability to be tested both longitudinally and laterally. Now, you will appreciate it, when the load is high in the air, if you tip the machine sideways, it's much more likely to tip over than if the load is down near the chassis. The point of the load chart is that it requires the operator to keep within those load limits as the arm is raised. So if you're going to raise something with this machine to 12 meters, you can only have a load of just over about 1,600 kilograms. Whereas if you're carrying a load at 7 meters, you can have a load of, I need to get my glasses out, I can't read that, considerably more anyway, because the, yes, you can have 2,000 kilograms unless you go way out beyond the front of the machine. And again, because that increases the tipping moment, the load goes down as the arm goes forward. So very close to the front of the machine, this machine has a capacity of over 4,000 kilograms. But as you go up in height, that goes down, and it goes right down to 1,500 kilograms when you get over 13 meters.
The maximum permissible load decreases both as you go higher,
yes,
and as the angle comes down? Or?
No, as the arm goes forward.
Arm goes forward.
As the angle comes down, the load goes up because both the lateral and the longitudinal tipping moment go down.
I haven't understood.
Right.
I haven't understood why. I understand why the lateral tipping moment goes down. I haven't understood why the longitudinal tipping moment.
Actually, no. I'm sorry. You're quite right. The longitudinal moment goes up as the arm goes. If you just rotate the arm at a fixed length going down, the load will go forward.
Decrease. I mean, if you look at this,
yeah, you're right.
If you have it at maximum extension,
yes,
at 50 degrees, you seem to be in the 1,000 kilogram band. But once it gets down to below 40 degrees, you're in the lower band.
You're quite right, Lord. It's because if the arm is a fixed length, and that's the pivot, as it goes down, the load is further forward. Yes. So the tipping moment is greater. You're absolutely right. Sorry, I misspoke.
Just make sure I've understood another aspect of this, which I don't think matters at all. Looking at the big blue bit on the right, 4,000 kilograms.
Yes.
That 4-ton load, it goes more or less straight up. In other words, with the things going vertically, actually you can lift 4 tons up to about 8 metres without concern, because it's vertical, and so there's not much of a moment. That's what's going on there.
Yes, because it's very close to the front of the machine. But there is, as it goes up, you see the permissible load going down as it goes up higher than that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because what they do is they test it on a tilt table, and as you tilt the machine sideways, it will eventually tip. And those lines represent a safety margin within the point at which it's been determined to tip when tested. Although the telehandler I've just shown you was fitted with a working platform, telehandlers are typically fitted with forks to carry a load, and the forks are articulated so that they remain horizontal while the arm is raised and lowered. If you go to the agreed technical primer at page 69 of the
Supplementary one.
supplementary bundle, it must be. I carefully failed to put sup on there, which is tab 4, page 69. You will see a picture, a diagram, which is taken from figure 1 of one of the other patents in suit 382, which is not the subject of this appeal. And it's been illustrated to show how the forward tipping moment reduces as the load goes up, because the distance forward of the pivot point, which in this case you can see is the stabilizers at the front, and the horizontal distance forward D reduces as that happens. If you turn back to page 68, you'll see the text is discussing the moment of tilt, and I don't think I need to take you through it, but this shows, the text describes in more detail from 13 to 17 what the illustration shows very quickly and in outline. Although that picture is taken from 382, if you go to the patent in suit, which is tab 1, and look at figure 1 of that on page 11 of the supplementary bundle, you'll see that it's a functionally identical diagram, although it's slightly differently drawn. Now, we've been through the tipping moment. Actually, yes, my note said the right thing about the way the tipping moment changes as you extend the arm. The patent in suit is about what happens when the machine moves. So the tipping forward pivot that we're concerned with here is the line of the front axle of the machine, because that is the axis about which it will tip if you allow the forward tipping moment to become too high. Although they're shown typically with stabilizers extended when the machine is being used. For example, in the agricultural industry, telehandlers are used with forks to pick up and move agricultural produce of various kinds. So you move them from one place to another. You drive in, pick up a load, turn the machine round, lift the arm up, drop the load somewhere else. And that's a very typical agricultural activity.
In that respect, it's just like a forklift truck. It's just a slight development as a forklift truck.
It's different from a forklift truck because a forklift truck has an essentially vertical lift.
Yes.
You can't go forwards, but you can go up and down. And the reason the telehandler is so popular is because it's incredibly versatile.
Yes.
And you can use it to do all sorts of things. It can even be used. If you'd seen the pictures of many of the uses that were at the trial. It's used, for example, telehandlers are routinely used on building sites to lift roof trusses into place. When they're, in those circumstances, they're used with suspended loads, which is a much more difficult problem to deal with if you're doing it a lot. And if you're interested and look at the technical primer, you will see that cranes, which typically have suspended loads, have much more complex control systems and requirements for controls for safety limits, because of course, if you move a crane rapidly and it has a suspended load, the load will swing, and the risk that that will cause tipping has to be dealt with in the regulations. None of that applies to telehandlers.
I think what you just said was that when the machine's being used in motion, then the pivot is the front wheel rather than the stabilizer.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I hope that's self-evident.
Yes.
If I put it the telehandlers are regulated. In the jargon of the regulatory environment, they are known as self-propelled variable reach trucks. The basic regulation which dictates how they should be tested and configured is BS EN 1459. That was in force from the end of 1998. The most directly relevant regulation for present purposes is BS EN 15000, which was published in 2008 and came into force in 2010, shortly after the priority date of the patent, the 965 patent, which is June 2009. The background is described by the trial judge. I'm sorry, I should also tell you that if you want to look at it, BS EN 15000 is at tab 3 of the supplementary bundle. I don't think we need to look at any of the detail in it, but let's take it as we go. The background is described by the trial judge in his judgment in entirely uncontentious terms, paragraphs 1 to 12. I don't propose to take you through them in any detail. You can miss out 7 to 9 because that's the other patents, and 11. But he basically describes telehandlers, how they work, and summarises the other forms of machinery and safety systems that they have. 12. The common general knowledge is dealt with at paragraphs 15 to 18. Again, it's completely uncontentious. All of that is entirely accepted, and I don't think there's any need to read it in any detail. You will see that from 15 that longitudinal load moment indicators were fitted to telehandlers for decades, and what they do is alert the operator when the machine is close to or has exceeded, it's in fact the forward tipping moment, but they don't stop it moving.
And they're based on what? The rear axle?
It's the same load sensor, it's just instead of actually preventing movement, all they do is indicate to the operator where he is in the load in comparison with the maximum tipping moment. So typically they have a series of lights. So you get green lights.
Yes, but the mechanics of it, there's a load sensor on the rear axle.
It's exactly the same.
Yes.
Precisely the same sensing method, but it doesn't stop the machine going into a condition where it might tip forwards. What it does do is give you a red signal if you get there, and basically tells you, the operator, not to do that. It is BS EN 15000 that introduced the requirement that the LLM-I become an LLM-C, a control rather than an indicator, and prevent the machine from moving into a condition where it would tip forward over the front axle of the stabilizers. when thinking about, there's one additional aspect of the measurement of the load on the rear axle that I should probably explain, just so that you understand the background. In practice, in designing and building the control system, it was routine to set the point at which movement is prevented somewhat earlier than the actual tipping point. That was to ensure the tipping point was not reached, and also because, as the court will again appreciate, when the movement of the arm is stopped, there's an inertial shock which causes a brief additional tipping force. As you stop something, the momentum of the load being stopped has to be absorbed. And if the stopping point is too close to the actual tipping point, then the additional transient load may be sufficient to take the machine over the tipping point. So a safety margin is routinely built in. And one of the virtues of the system the judge the earlier patent was that because the arm is slowed down as it approaches the tipping point, the inertial shock when it stops is less, and you can set the machine up so that it will go closer to its maximum and therefore has a higher rated capacity and is more useful. One of the problems associated with control systems is that because they stop the movement of the arm, the operator may be prevented from carrying out a movement which he or she wishes to direct the machine to perform. This can be a particular problem when the machine is moving, and you'll see this from both the patent in suit and the prior art. This is because the measured load on the rear axle, or the measured, when we come to the prior art, the measured load on the boom, will change rapidly with vibration and passage of the machine over uneven ground. And the control system may give a spike in the tipping signal, which is actually a false signal caused simply by the vibration and the terrain, and therefore may unnecessarily prevent movement of the arm because of these transient signals. This is explained in the patent. If you go to tab 1, page 2 of the bundle, paragraphs 1 to 5 set out the background. Paragraph 1 just describes the working machine. You may take it that is a telehandler. And paragraph 2 explains the proneness to longitudinal instability as the loads go up and or forward. Statutory requirement for machines to be required provided with a control system, automatically prevents the operation, increase the stability beyond the safe limit. And they have to have an indicator. Essential safety feature, machines used in public places. Requirement where machines are used for loading and unloading. Machines used on stationary. When the machine is travelling on the ground, the working arm when the implement is loaded is substantially lowered. According to the legislation, the longitudinal load moment control system may be disabled when the working arm is fully retracted. And that makes complete sense because, of course, if the arm is completely retracted and sitting on the front of the machine, the load can't move and nothing can happen. When they're used in an agricultural context, the surface is often uneven, and known control systems at 5 are all provided on all the working machines regardless of their use. It would be appreciated that when a machine is provided with such a longitudinal load moment control system in an agricultural context, driven on uneven ground, a longitudinal load sensor of the control system may be subject to transient forces which indicate longitudinal instability, and the system may therefore operate automatically to prevent or stop operation of the working arm when not required. This false indication can actually lead to an increase in the machine's instability. So that's the problem. False indications of instability when the machine is moving. Professor Plummer explains at paragraph 6.8 of his first report, which is at page 121 of the supplementary bundle, behind tab 5. The conventional approach to dealing with this problem would be to try to eliminate or filter out. I'm on page 121 of the supplementary bundle, tab 5, page 121, paragraph 6.8 at the bottom of the page, second sentence.
Thank you.
The conventional approach would be to try to eliminate or filter out the rogue signals that are causing the problem, while ensuring that the longitudinal stability of the machine is protected at all times. That's the approach described in the earlier patent 065, where the signal is either ignored at the beginning of motion or filtered to smooth out transients. Explains where he describes that. All the more so since undergoing a tipping event when the machine is in motion would be considered even more serious than the machine tipping over when stationary. Now, that's what he says is the conventional approach, and what I want to flag up here is that that is essentially the approach taken in the prior art, contrary to the approach taken in the patent. In the prior art, what the Aichi prior art does is to eliminate the rogue signal by using a signal which is not driven by the vibration or uneven ground that the machine is moving on. I'll come explain that in more detail very shortly, but I want to flag up to you now that that's the point of this appeal. Both the experts agree with that analysis. And a second point that we can pick up as we go past is in paragraph 6.10. Professor Plummer makes clear that the LLMC may be of any kind, according to the patent. He particularly picks up paragraph 40 of the patent, that you don't have to have the sensor on the rear axle,
Sorry, where are we
an
now?
alternative type of sensor or in an alternative position.
Where are we now?
Sorry, I'm 6.10 on the next.
6.10. Thank you.
Well, the only point is the LLMC is not limited to the specific embodiment that is described in the patent, the standard telehandler methodology with a sensor on the rear axle. You can use any method which is capable of determining a tipping moment and stopping the machine tipping. So when we come to the prior art, you'll see that what it does, because it has slightly different requirements, it measures the load on the arm and uses the load on the arm and the position of the arm as the data that it uses to determine whether or not the machine is in a safe condition.
Just on to make sure I've understood what's in 610, Professor Plummer is saying paragraph 40 of this is the last sentence you draw our attention to, also states that the longitudinal load moment sensor need not be provided on the rear axle, okay, but may be provided by an alternative type of sensor. So you need a sensor, just an alternative type.
Yes.
And or in an alternative position. So the sensor doesn't have to be on the rear axle, it may be somewhere else.
No, you could measure the load on the arm and calculate the safe position from that, for example, using your knowledge, using data from the configuration of the machine. There is probably an infinite number of ways to do this. The beauty of the standard telehandler system is it is far and away the simplest.
But it needs to be a longitudinal load moment sensor.
Yes.
Whatever that is. Okay.
Yes. The approach taken in the 965 patent is, as Professor Plummer says at 6.8, counterintuitive. You turn the control system off when the machine is moving, so that the operator is able to move the lifting arm at will. And that is specifically described in the patent, paragraphs 8 on page 2 of the supplementary bundle.
It also seems slightly counterintuitive that the regulatory framework doesn't require there to be an operating LLMC once you're moving.
We had a lot of discussion about this at the trial. it is actually quite difficult to find a way to regulate absolutely completely these machines because they're so versatile and can be used in so many different ways. It's quite difficult to measure what they're doing so as to ensure that they never go into an unstable condition. Measuring the lateral stability is actually quite difficult, and that's why the regulations have long required a load chart, and operators are trained not to exceed the load on the load chart, so that they know that if they do that, the machine may tip over sideways. But it is, putting it bluntly, it went into the too difficult pile.
So all that the regulation requires in terms of LLMC is a cut-off if you're stationary and you exceed
yes.
the particular.
But typically, the cut-off system will operate at all times, and the object of this invention is to remove the problem that gives rise to when the machine is moving.
It disables the control system
Yes.
once you're moving above a threshold speed. Yes.
That's right. Well, for present purposes, once you're moving, there's no magic for the purposes of this appeal in any particular threshold. Once the machine is in motion, the system is disabled.
Yep.
And the point I should make right now is that, of course, any system that prevents the machine from moving into a configuration that the control system determines is potentially unsafe is a longitudinal load moment control system. Whether it uses an instantaneously measured piece of data for the load, or whether it uses a calculated load, as you'll see in the prior art, what it does is it uses a calculated load, which is determined in one of two ways. But whether it's doing that or using an instantaneous load, it is a control system, the purpose and effect of which is to prevent the machine from moving into an unstable condition. The patent, the claim of the patent is switch that off, disable it. Do not control the movement of the arm when the machine is moving. And that's why I'm showing you paragraph 8, and I will show you paragraph 37 in a moment, because the description says so in terms.
Through that term in that way, I don't remember reading that.
Sorry, was the judge?
Was the judge asked to construe that term in that way? The reason I ask is I don't recall reading the judge
In the judgment?
coming to that
Well,
conclusion.
no, this was all explained to the judge, I can assure you. He dealt with it in the way he did in his judgment, and we say he was wrong to do so.
Okay. I mean, but what might be said is that your functional, what you've just given us is a functional definition of longitudinal load
Yes.
moment control system,
Yes.
which is anything which prevents unstable conditions.
Yes.
Might it be said that it's at least anything which prevents unstable conditions, which does it using a longitudinal load moment sensor?
I would respectfully say no, because you can perform the same task less effectively by assuming what you would otherwise sense. In other words, let me jump forward to the prior art. What the prior art does is when the machine is moving, it uses one of two measurements. The first measurement is simply to assume that the arm is loaded with the maximum permitted load.
So it's not sensing anything.
It's sensing the position of the arm, because that determines, coupled with the load on it, it's a mobile elevated work platform, so it has people and tools on it, and you can put 200 or 250 kilograms on the platform. And one way the machine operates is to assume that the 250 kilograms is on that platform and calculate the safe limit from that. That is a load moment control system. It's just rather more as the prior art explains, it's more restrictive than measuring the actual load. So the alternative and preferred method, and again you'll see this in the evidence, is that instead of using the maximum permitted load, the machine uses the load that's measured immediately before it moves. So it has a load sensor on the platform. It is measuring how heavily loaded the platform is, and it uses that figure because, for obvious reasons, it is very unlikely when the platform is lifted and loaded and the machine moves that the load will change. So it can assume that load is still there. And then it uses the position of the arm vertically, horizontally, and extending to determine when that load will take the machine to an unstable position.
I mean, that's what this appeal is about, isn't it? This
That's
issue.
everything this appeal is about.
Because it might be said, well, hang on a minute. In the case in which you take a view, you use the maximum weight, maximum load, you just take that as a given. You don't measure the load at all. You don't know what load it is, and all you measure is the extension and the angle. You never know what the load moment is. So how can you be sensing the load moment?
What you're doing is you are
The actual load moment, you never do you?
you're not sensing the actual moment when the machine is moving, but you are assuming a moment from data input that you have and stopping the machine moving into a position in which it would be unstable, which is a load moment control system. It's it's not a very efficient one.
Well, I understand that, Mr. Laing, but that's what this case is about. I mean, if you choose to do it simply by measuring the extension and the angles, the lengths and the angles, and nothing else, are you a longitudinal load moment control system using as claimed in your claim? That's the question.
I think I'm assuming I think you're putting the point slightly differently from the way I put it, but I'm not going to say you're wrong.
Okay, I'm wrong, that's all right.
No, I'm not going to say you're wrong because my argument essentially accepts that is a control system.
Well, I say accepts. I mean,
That's the basis for your argument.
that's the point. You want it to be a control system.
There are.
It's still in operation when the thing's moving.
But the point is there are two ways that the prior art can do it, and the second one, there is no doubt it's measuring a load, because it's measuring the load immediately before the machine moves,
Right.
and it is using that data. That must be a load moment control system.
Okay. I don't recall that being the point that the judge was dealing with, or the point the evidence was dealing with.
No, because the experts agree that whichever way you do it, it's a load moment control system.
Okay. Well, you'll have to show us that. I'm sure you're going to.
I will. But now I put it to you like this: even if you don't think that's a particularly powerful point, once you are using a measured load, even if it's not the load instantaneously measured, there can, in my respectful submission, be no argument that it's not a load moment control system, because it's measuring the load before the machine moves. It's then measuring the position of the arm, angle, extension and height, rotational angle, extension and height, and it is determining whether the load generated by that combination of data is an unsafe one and the machine should be prevented from moving into that position. So going back to paragraph 8 of the patent, it explains there's a longitudinal load moment control system operational to protect against excess longitudinal instability during the loading and unloading operations when the machine is stationary or travelling below a threshold speed, to protect the machine against overturning. Then at line 25, however, when the machine travels at above the threshold speed, the load moment control system is disabled, so that the working arm can be raised or lowered or extended without the operation of any actuator being disabled by the longitudinal load moment control system. And it then goes on to point out that even though the control system is disabled, the indicator will continue to provide a visual indication. And if we then move to paragraph 37 in the detailed description, in fact, pick it up at 36, when the travelling speed is determined to be less than the threshold speed, the LLMC remains fully operational. However, 37, when the travelling speed is determined to be above the threshold speed in accordance with the present invention, irrespective of whether the loading arm is raised or lowered or retracted or not, the controller disables the load moment control system, permitting the operator to operate the actuator devices at will. Now, my respectful submission, proper understanding of what that is describing, is the distinction between a machine where there is a control system which prevents the operation of the arm in certain configurations in operation, and one where there isn't. It is not concerned with precisely how one determines what the safe limit is. And that's why I say the question should be approached on the broader basis. The distinction is not between whether you measure something instantaneously or use a piece of data that you have either calculated or measured earlier. It is whether you stop it at all. The inventive concept is embodied in integer k of the integerized form of the claim, which you can find, it's set out in our skeleton. I don't think it's conveniently anywhere else. But that's at core, page 18, behind tab 3. Where the machine is determined to be travelling to speed above a threshold speed.
Are we only concerned with claim 1?
For the purpose of the appeal, yes, there's nothing turns on any of the subsidiary claims.
So it's integer G, the machine having
yes,
an LLMC.
I was going to focus on G to I now. Longitudinal load moment control system, which is H, functional automatically to disable the operation of the actuator devices which are described, which would increase longitudinal instability in the event that a predetermined machine longitudinal instability is sensed. Now, I say that covers both systems that use a variety of data to determine whether a longitudinal instability will arise. You do not.
It doesn't say will arise. It says is sensed.
Is sensed.
So that requires a sensor. It requires some sort of input from the machine.
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
and I think there may be a question as to how much input you require from the machine.
In my submission, it is not. What's the right word? It's not prescriptive as to the nature of the sensor. You can assume certain data, you can measure certain data, as long as what you're trying to do is sense when the machine is likely to become unstable, passes a stability threshold.
There's no difference. I mean, what Mark said against you is that in the example, which is clearly the patent is broader than the example, but in the example given in the patent, when you have a sensor on the rear axle, there is something real about the idea that you're sensing an instability, because what you're detecting is that the downward force on the rear axle is dropping down to near zero, and that's telling you that you're reaching instability because you're ceasing to push hard on the back.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just measuring the length and angle of the arm, having an opinion about what the weight or the end of it is if you've measured it, or having an opinion about what the biggest it could be is from the table if you're using that approach, you're never sensing an instability. You don't feel that you're unstable. You're simply taking a view that you're not going to let it go beyond a certain limit.
I would respectfully disagree with that analysis. You are sensing whether an instability will occur, but you are using, and I want to make sure I say this the right way, you're making certain assumptions about when instability will occur, but there's nothing in the claim that prevents you from doing that. The machine's instability will definitely be increasing as the arm goes into certain positions, and you are sensing that and preventing that movement. The fact that you have made an assumption as to some other piece of data that you could measure does not take you outside the proposition, the nature of the activity. You are still sensing the approaching instability.
Okay. Can I ask you a different question, but related? Your integers, this is just what you've put in.
Yes, I think it was treated as the agreed.
Yes, I'm wondering if the split between H and I is wrong. The words which would increase longitudinal instability seem to me to go more naturally with operation of the first and or second actuated device. In other words, if you extended the arm, it would increase the instability.
Yes.
It doesn't really go with in the event that a predetermined instability is sensed. It's not the sensing of the instability.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think you're probably right. We should have done a better job.
So can we move the words which would increase in longitudinal instability to
Yes.
the end of H?
I think actually you could combine H and I without affecting the way one looks at the claim. I think
you could do, but I find it helpful to split them out. H tells you what the LMAC does. It stops you extending the arm or raising the arm or lowering the arm, whichever it is, in the direction which will increase instability. And I tells you when it does it in the event that a predetermined machine longitudinal instability is sensed.
I'm perfectly happy to do that, Lord. That's a very, if I may respectfully say so, very much more sensible way to break them up.
And then I think it is a question, as my lord pointed out, as what it means to sense a longitudinal instability. And I think your answer is, if you've got a sensor which reaches a certain level and it then stops the operation, that's sufficient to come within HI.
For example, if the arm is extending forwards and the machine is sensing the length of the extension, it reaches a threshold at which, using the other data or assumptions that it has built in, the threshold is reached and it stops the arm moving. That is sensing longitudinal instability by reference to a predetermined threshold, longitudinal instability. The fact that the predetermined threshold may be safer than is necessary if you did a better job doesn't make it not an LLMC.
Well, I could see, well, you could just have something saying you can't extend the arm beyond X meters. And as it approaches that, it slows it down and then stops it. But that wouldn't really be sensing an instability. It'd be sensing that a particular parameter, the length of the arm, was being reached.
But with respect, my lord, the decision to do that has to be based on some evaluation of whether the machine will become unstable. So what the designer has done in that instance is to assume that the machine will become unstable at that point and cut off movement. Now, the assumption may be overcautious because the load on the arm may be less than he is taking into account. But in my respectful submission, it's still cutting off movement when a predetermined longitudinal instability is sensed, because what it's doing is stopping the movement at a threshold which the designer has decided is the appropriate one.
So you might have some help actually from paragraph 40, because the bit that you showed us in the evidence cut off. I was going to ask you about this anyway. It was an incomplete quote of paragraph
Well, that was what
Which
Professor
is-
Plummer looked at.
Okay, well, Professor Plummer, if he'd been in trouble with Mr. Justice Laddie, he'd have got in trouble for doing a quote that wasn't the whole passage, because the critical next words that come after the bit he quoted say, provided, and this is at line 27, and provide an appropriate signal. Sorry, no, provided that, I'm sorry, it's line 26. It says you can have a different kind of sensor, provided that sensor 30 is able to determine the longitudinal load moment and provide an appropriate signal to the controller by means of which the controller can determine whether or not the longitudinal load moment of the machine is or is not within a safe limit, i.e. less than a predetermined instability. So one might say that that's defining what this patent means by a predetermined instability as being whether or not the load is within a safe limit.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because that's the entire thrust of the teaching. If I may put it like this, in a, no, I don't think that helps. However you go about it, what you're doing is predetermining the point at which you consider the machine to be unstable. And if you are then sensing the operation of the machine so that you can determine whether you are reaching that predetermined instability, level of instability, you are doing what the patent requires. You don't have to measure any particular parameter to achieve it.
What paragraph 40, as my lord very helpfully points out, requires is that the sensor, so there has to be a sensor,
Yes.
it has to be able to determine the longitudinal load moment. Now, longitudinal, I think we can ignore. That just means it tips forwards rather than sideways, doesn't it?
I'm not taking a point that the prior art isn't longitudinal, although I could.
So what is a load moment which the sensor has to be able to determine?
It has to be able to determine whether the machine is
Reaching a predetermined
yes
threshold
threshold
of something.
of something. Now
And you said it's enough that that's calculated by reference to maximum permissible load. So if your maximum permissible load was 250 kilograms, you assume 250 kilograms, and you say if the angle is 45 degrees, then the maximum length with that load is, maximum extension is 5 meters. And all the sensor then has to do is determine whether you've got to 5 meters at an angle of 45 degrees.
exactly right.
It does not need to be able to say the actual load is only 10 kilos and the actual instability is here.
Yeah, I would respectfully entirely endorse that, because however you do this kind of operation, you are not measuring everything you could, and you have to make certain assumptions. When we come to the prior art, you will see that it has a table built in, and the machine is checking against a table, whichever way it's working, whether the arm has reached the envelope of that table. And there's quite a lot about envelope control here, which I'll come back to. But what it's doing is it's determining whether the machine is within a safe working envelope. And you can do that by measuring any of the characteristics and or assuming some of the characteristics. The ones that are easy to measure, you measure. If they're difficult to measure, you simply determine what you're going to use in your calculation. And you use that as the determination of whether or not you've reached the predetermined threshold of stability.
There's no, sorry, I was going to say, there's no magic in the word moment. It's not a technical term, is it? Does it just mean point in time? I mean, point.
No,
There is a magic in it. It is a technical.
it is a technical term.
So what does moment mean?
Moment means the it's not the force. It's
Force
the
times the length.
it's the force times length, isn't it? It's the propensity for the machine to tip. So it is the, if you imagine turning a spanner on a nut, you're exerting a moment on the nut, and the amount of the moment that you're exerting will depend upon the force that you apply to the spanner and the length of the spanner's arm. And the moment is the, as my Lord Justice Birss said, is one times the other. Force times length.
I mean, it is important actually. The moment is a technical term. It has a well-defined scientific meaning. It obviously means it's obviously been used in that way
Yes.
in this patent, and it has SI units which are Newton meters, if I
Yes.
remember rightly.
As they would be. What
As
it,
they would
what
be,
it is.
yes.
You're absolutely, my Lord Justice Birss is absolutely right. But the point I'm making is that you can determine the threshold for the tipping moment at which you cut the machine off using any inputs that you choose, as long as you are doing something to sense whether the machine is moving into what you determine, you predefine to be an unsafe condition.
But
You
this
don't have to measure.
but this seems to me to be important, because if the moment is a technical term which is measurable in Newton meters, then you need to know what the load is in order to determine the moment. And if you don't know what the load is, you're just assuming a maximum load. You're not actually sensing the moment at all. You're sensing a theoretical moment based on a maximum load. And all you're measuring is the length. Is that enough to say that you are a sensor able to determine the longitudinal load moment? It's not obvious to me you are.
I would respectfully submit that you are, because you are using data which you're using inputs which change with the configuration of the machine. You're accepting that all you're doing is you're accepting that the moment that you are sensing may be greater than the actual moment. You're just building in a bigger safety factor. It's a design choice. And anyway, as I've pointed out, if the prior art does this at all, it discloses a method, the preferred method, in which it is sensing the load. So it is doing that even when the machine is moving.
Yes, but it also has a method in which it's not doing it.
No, it doesn't. Well, I'm sorry, you're quite right. It does, but...
Can I be sure I understood, before we get to the argument, I understand the facts, and we'll have to look at the prior art. My understanding of the prior art is that when you're travelling, you cut off the actual measurement based on your actual load, and at least in one variant of the invention, you replace that with a maximum load.
Yes.
So what the sensor is sensing is the actual angle and
Call it position.
position of the arm, but it's not sensing the actual moment that the actual load is exerting in that position, because that depends upon the weight, and you don't know what the weight is. Is that, have I understood that correctly?
You have understood that correctly, but of course, when it comes to what the prior art discloses, you have to remember that it discloses both kinds of operation.
Well, I understand that, but if prior art discloses 10 different things and one of them makes the patent in suit obvious, it doesn't matter if it also discloses 9 different things and says they're the preferred thing. It still discloses something which makes the patent in suit obvious. Is that not right?
Yes, that is right, but of course, what that's leaving out of account is that the machine, that either way it's operating, it's trying to control and limit the movement of the arm according to the moment. It's just using a different way of assessing the moment.
I see. Yes.
So,
Well, I think I understand the way you put it. I think you say that the prior art is determining the longitudinal load moment and using that to control the operation of the machine.
yes.
So it is an LLMC. And what's novel about yours and not obvious was saying if you're moving, you don't have any LLMC.
Exactly. And putting it very, very crudely, even if the LLMC is not a very good one because of some of the data it's using is more restrictive than it needs to be, it's still doing the same task, controlling and preventing the movement of the arm. So it is still an LLMC and it is still in operation.
There's a bit of a curiosity though, isn't there? Because the rated weight plus position sensor method, which I understand, Mr. Lee, you say is an LLMC, and that's part of the point of what we need to deal with.
Yep.
Isn't an LLMC which you need to turn off if you're moving. It doesn't suffer from the whole point of this invention, because the whole point of this invention is when you've got a load sensor which is actually giving you a piece of information you need to know to measure the actual moment. When you move, it bounces up and down, and that's why the point of the invention is to turn it off. Whereas, as indeed the prior art effectively shows, it says, well, you can use this cruder method while you're moving, because it isn't actually measuring the instantaneous load and therefore isn't suffering from the instability problem at all. So it's a slightly curious state of affairs that you're claiming, part of your case, you're claiming that method as part of the method of your patent that needs to be turned off when you move. But of course, it doesn't have to be turned off when you move, and that's why I actually don't turn it off.
Let me see if I've understood that. What you're saying, my lord, is that Aichi has come up with a method of avoiding the problem by not measuring the instantaneous load on the platform.
And it has two. We'll get there. We do need to look at it, but it's got two methods.
Yes.
One it uses when it's stationary, and one it uses when it's moving. And the method when it's moving doesn't measure the instantaneous stresses on the back axle, and therefore isn't fooled by bouncing over the ruts in your field. And that's what this is all about.
There is a difference in principle between using an assumed piece of data or a previously measured piece of data and operating the control system and turning it off. And that's the distinction I make in relation to the difference between the prior art and the patent. The prior art has come up with the conventional method, eliminate the dodgy data by using something else and continue to control. The invention of the patent is counterintuitively, just turn the system off, don't control at all.
Understand?
That's my case. It's not complicated. And I say that that's what the patent describes and explains, and precisely what Aichi, the prior art, does not do.
Can I put something else which I'm sure you'll come to, which is, as I understand it, what's really said against you is as you've just explained, your invention, claimed in the patent, is when you're moving, you switch off the LMC. You add, and you don't replace it with anything. But the inventive part is having something which switches off the LMC when you're moving. That's what you've claimed.
No.
Am I wrong about that? I thought it was.
That's what the words of the claim say. But
Yes.
remember, the words of the claim must be interpreted in the light of the description.
Well, I understand that. Let me just put the point, and
No
doubt you'll come to it. So the invention is, when you're moving, you switch it off. And what's said against you, as I understand it, is, well, Aichi has two sensors. And for this argument, it doesn't really matter whether you call both of them LLMCs or not. The first one is clearly an LLMC. And Aichi says, when you're traveling, you switch off the first one. It goes on to say, you replace it with the second one, whether that is or is not an LLMC, it's clearly not the same LLMC as when you're stationary. So that the prior art does disclose the idea of having a movement sensor which switches off the LLMC that you're using when stationary. And if that's right, does it matter that in your patent you say, and you don't replace it with anything, because you don't need to under the regulations and you rely on the operators to stay within the parameters? Whereas in Aichi, they say, and you switch it to another one, which relies upon some rather cruder inputs than the one you were using. And if that's the argument facing you, it may not matter whether Aichi's second method is an LLMC or not, because it's not the same as the first method, so you have switched the first one off when you're moving. That, as I understand it, is the argument that you're facing.
I'm just digesting.
Yes.
that.
Well, as I said, no doubt you'll come to it at some stage. You don't need to answer it straight away, but we've gone down this path of whether Aichi's sensor when travelling is or is not an LLMC, which is a very interesting question, and it's very helpful to have your submissions on that. But I'm wondering if the argument you're facing really depends upon the answer to that question. That's a very long way of putting a point to you, I'm sorry. And as I say, I don't expect an instantaneous answer.
Well, there are two answers to it. The first and most fundamental, or more fundamental answer in my submission is that what the claim requires is not just that you switch off the system that's operating when the machine is stationary, but that you have no system operating when the machine is moving.
When you say the claim requires, I'm
Yes.
not construing the claim.
Yes, because what it does is disables the LLMC, and the text of the specification makes clear that what that means is it enables the operator to move the arm at will and without restriction. You get that from paragraphs 8 and 37. The words at will are used in paragraph 37.
But they're not used. You'll have to excuse me. I'm not as familiar with you as to how you construe a pattern, but I thought that the focus was ultimately on the integers of a claim.
Yes.
Of course, if there's an ambiguity, you have reference to the preceding paragraphs which explain them, but you don't import, I thought, into the claim an integer which is not there just because it's mentioned in the description.
No, you're absolutely right. And with respect, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is saying when you read the description,
you're construing the word disabling.
It tells you
Yes,
what disabling means.
It tells you what disabling means. Yeah, I see. Thank you. So you say your patent requires there to be no LLMC when you're moving.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the second answer, by the way, is that actually when you read Aichi, you discover that it can use precisely the same methodology when stationary and moving as yet another alternative.
Right.
It envisages exactly the same method of operation, measuring the load on the platform. The only difference that it makes when the machine moves is it uses the last measured stationary load throughout movement, but it's performing exactly the same calculation against exactly the same stored table of safe limits. So it's doing exactly the same thing when moving and stationary. And that's within Aichi switchings. And what I say to you is that tells you what Aichi thinks and means by the switching system that it discloses. It tells you that it understands that what it's doing is operating the LMC at all times.
Thank you.
We've jumped about a bit, so I just need to check where I'm able to pick up my note. Well, you're quite right. We say the invention is turning the control system off and having no control system when the machine is moving. We say that was novel and inventive at the priority date. My note very conveniently then moves to the prior art. So can we look at it? Well, the first thing I wanted to say to you is, it's not a telehandler. So you have to put yourself in a slightly different context. It's a lifting platform designed to raise workers to height in order to work on elevated workpieces such as street lamps, or as I'm sure you know, they're often referred to as cherry pickers because they're used for fruit picking. I'm sure I don't need to describe them in detail to the court. You will have seen them. You'll be familiar with them from having seen them being used around the inns. And there's a green and white one, which is frequently parked outside my room in South Square in Gray's Inn. No doubt you've all seen the equivalents in the other inns. Mobile elevated work platforms, or MUPs, are outlined in the technical primer at tab 4 of the supplementary bundle, pages 88 to 92. Paragraphs 88, I think. Page 89. And read paragraph 88, you'll see that two particular tasks I've mentioned, lighting street lamps, not lighting street lamps. Nowadays they're used for repairing street lamps. I'm sure you will have seen lifting platforms, usually actually on the backs of vans for the street lamps, that the local authorities use to get the workers up to change the bulbs and fix the wiring at the top of the street light. And they're obviously widely used to lift you up into trees to pick fruit. The illustration on page 90 is figure 2 from Aichi. While we're here, I can quickly describe it. You see there's a chassis at the bottom, 1, with 2 axles with wheels. The 2 is the rotatable mount, and 3 is the body of the machine. And the body of the machine can be rotated around the rotatable mount 2, which has a vertical axis. So you can turn the platform around relative to the chassis. The lifting arm is extendable. It is 4 sections 4A, 4B, and 4C, and 4A, 4B, and 4C. 4D is the head of the arm. There is a lifting cylinder 5, and cylinders 6A and 6B control the angle of the platform as the arm is raised and lowered, because you will appreciate, as with the forks of a telehandler, the platform base has to be kept horizontal, and that means that you have to rotate the angle of the platform relative to the angle of the arm as the arm is lifted up. And there is a load sensor, I can't remember which integer is actually the load sensor, which measures the load on the platform to determine principally whether it's overloaded and stop the machine being used, but it can also be used as part of the load moment control system. You'll see an example over the next page of a Manitou aerial work platform with a slightly more articulated arm, and below that a JCB scissor lift, which just goes vertically up and down. And at paragraph 89 on page 92, you will see a description of what MUPs are generally used to do. So that's the context in which we're operating, and you will appreciate that, of course, because they carry human operators, preventing them tipping over is absolutely critical. You cannot turn a machine like this over and throw operators to the ground. You will almost certainly kill or injure them if they're at any height. You'll probably kill them, you will certainly seriously injure them. So preventing that is paramount. If you go back to the Aichi document itself, in tab 2 of the same bundle, it's Japanese, so we have it in translation. And I can pick it up. The description, I'll jot about a little bit in it if I may. The description of what is in the figure I have just shown you is at paragraphs 13 to 16 on pages 23 and 24. I think I have described them in sufficient detail that you don't need to read them. The only thing I couldn't remember was a load sensor device in 16. The answer is I don't think it has an integer on the diagram, but there's a load sensor built into it. Going back to I've shown you what's in the diagram. It has a control system for ensuring the platform is not moved into a position in which it's able to cause the machine to tip over. And of course, as I've said, that's absolutely paramount. What it does is measure the tipping moment of the machine according to the position of and load on the work platform. And how this is done is outlined in the introduction, described in more detail in the specific description. We can actually start at paragraph 1, which, because the claims precede the description, is at the bottom of page 18 of the bundle. And we can run through to paragraph 12 to see what the control system does. So it starts in paragraph 1. The work platform actually more particularly relates, this is the top of page 19, to an operation limitation device, which controls the operation of the boom and the movement of a self-propelled aerial work platform vehicle. Now, can I draw your attention to the fact, and you'll see this repeated in the diagrams, that Aichi is describing a device which controls the operation of the boom as being present throughout and operating throughout. And it does that throughout the text. What it describes when the machine is stationary and moving is using slightly different methodologies to execute that control. It then goes on to describe the prior art and explains the overturning moment acting on the vehicle and how that changes as the arm is raised and lowered and extended and contracted. And it says that the use, picking it up 4 lines from the bottom of paragraph 2, the use of an overturning prevention device such as a moment limitation device or working range limitation device is thus well known in the art as a means of preventing loss of stability due to an undue increase in overturning direction, and it changes in this way. And then it goes on to describe a working range limitation device configured so as to calculate in advance the overturning moment arising from a position to which the work platform is moved, setting as the permissible working range a range over which this overturning moment is kept to a permissible moment within the permissible range of overturning moments which do not compromise the stability of the vehicle, detecting the position of the work platform in actual aerial work, and limiting any operation of the boom which would move the detected position of the work platform beyond the permissible working range. So it regards this working range method as a moment limitation control. And in 4, it explains the issue with this. When setting the permissible working range in advance in this way, the overturning moment arising is generally calculated with the load on the work platform taken as the rated load, in other words, the maximum permissible load. And the range is set so that this calculated overturning moment is kept to a permissible moment. As a result, though it is possible for the work platform to be moved somewhat beyond the permissible working range without the overturning moment exceeding permissible moment, where the aerial work is being done with a load on the work platform that is less than the rated load, it is not in fact possible to move the work platform beyond the permissible working range. In other words, despite the fact that it would actually be possible to move the work platform over a wider working range than the permissible working range with a low load on the work platform, The work platform can only be moved over the narrow permissible working range determined by the rated load. In contrast, a moment limitation device is a device which, for example, detects the hoist angle of the boom together, the axial tension of the hoisting cylinder, extends the boom, finding from these values the actual overturning moment acting on the vehicle from the boom and the work platform attached to the boom, and limiting the operation of the boom where the overturning moment found in this way exceeds the permissible moment. When limiting the boom operation using the actual overturning moment found in the axial tension, there is the advantage that it's possible to move the work platform over the largest range of movement permissible, according to the load on the platform at the time, as the overturning moment found corresponds to the actual load on the work platform, enabling work to be carried out over a wider working range than where the above described working range limitation is used. And then it goes on in paragraph 6 to describe the difficulty to be resolved. It is frequently the case that the structure of a self-propelled platform is such that aerial work can be carried out not only with the vehicle stationary but also with it in motion. When carrying out aerial work in this way with the vehicle in motion, additional vibrational force due to the vibrational movement acts on the boom and work platform, and the detected axial tension of the hoisting cylinder varies under the influence of the vibration. When the overturning moment is found using axial tension, which varies in this way, the overturning moment will also vary, with the difficulty that moment limitation cannot be accurately controlled. It should be noted that methods such as adding hysteresis to the detected value, detecting axial tension over an extended detection interval, or filtering the detection value to suppress the variation are used to mitigate the effect of the variation in the detected value when the vehicle is in motion. However, with any of these methods, there is the difficulty that precision of control over moment limitation can deteriorate, control can become unstable.
Excuse my ignorance, Mr. Silverleaf, what's hysteresis?
Hysteresis is where you move something in one direction and it's sticky, so it doesn't move back the same way. Are you familiar with energy absorbing rubber, the things that foam that earplugs are made out of? If you roll them up and put them in your ear,
yes.
they're
easier to compress, but
yes,
they don't bounce back.
That's hysteresis.
Thank you.
So there are a variety of ways you can deal with this problem, is what it's telling you. You can filter the signal, you can smooth the signal, you can introduce an artificial restriction on it bouncing back. That's the hysteresis. But what Aichi is doing is saying, I've got a better method for achieving the same outcome, namely using a different way of approaching the problem that arises when the vehicle is in motion. I want to emphasize that the different way does not involve switching off the control system. It involves operating the control system so that it continues to ensure that the vehicle is in a safe condition. Going on in paragraph 9, to achieve this purpose, sorry, I probably didn't read you paragraph 8, did I? The invention has as its purpose control of the operation of the boom or the like of a self-propelled aerial work platform vehicle with relatively high precision and stability to prevent overturning, both when the vehicle is stationary and in motion. That's the critical point. To achieve this purpose, the operation control device for a self-propelled aerial work platform of the invention comprises a vehicle capable of self-propulsion. So this paragraph 9 is essentially the claim. And a work platform attached to the apex of the boom, which moves with the raising, lowering, and extension and retraction of the boom, being provided with a moment limitation means which detects the overturning moment acting on the vehicle, boom and work platform, limiting any operation of the boom for which this overturning moment would exceed a permissible moment. A working range control means which detects the position of the work platform or the apex of the boom from the operation of the boom, limiting any operation of the boom which would cause this position to exceed a preset permissible working range. A motion detector means which detects whether or not the vehicle is moving, and a switching means which governs switching between limitation by the moment limitation and limitation by the working range control. A switch is made to boom operation limitation by the moment limitation means using the switching means where it has been detected by the motion detector means that the vehicle is stationary. With a switch made to boom operation limitation by the working range control means using the switchover means where it has been detected by the motion detector means that the vehicle is moving. 10 explains that when the vehicle is stationary, you can use the maximum working range corresponding to the actual load. At the same time as detection of the moment is inaccurate when the vehicle is moving due to additional vibrational forces. Aerial work is only possible over a permissible working range set in advance by the working range control means, ensuring that aerial work is safe and unaffected by vibration of movement. In this way, it is possible to ensure that the work is reliably and safely carried out over the maximum permissible working range whether the vehicle is in motion or at rest. Paragraph 11 is important. It should be noted that where the vehicle is in motion, limitation of the boom operation by the working range control means is preferably carried out with a permissible working range set based on the overturning moment acting on the vehicle immediately prior to the vehicle starting to move, which is of course determined by the actual load. The overturning moment on the vehicle immediately prior to the vehicle starting to move is an overturning moment detected with the vehicle stationary and can be accurately detected, and this overturning moment also corresponds to the actual work platform load. As a result, if the permissible working range is set based on the overturning moment detected immediately prior to the vehicle starting to move in this way, it is possible to set the optimum permissible working range with safety ensured at that point. And what I want to emphasise is that what that shows you is that the Aichi invention is all about ensuring safe operation when stationary or moving, and doing so in the most efficient way. And it therefore is controlling the movement of the boom, whether the machine is stationary or moving. And its preferred method is to do that using a measured load at all times, but that it is prepared to do that using an assumed load, which is not as effective because it reduces the working range, but it is a way of ensuring safety. So what I say is that this is conceptually completely the opposite of what is being proposed in the claim and the patent. Paragraph 12, it explains that there is a load detector to detect overloading. And as I shall show you in a moment, it can also be used to detect overloading of the platform, can also be used as part of the control system. We don't, I think, need to go through 13 to 19, because that's the detail of the construction and relates to the drawing, which we've already seen. We can move on to 20. So 20 explains that the operator gets on the platform as an operating device to control movement, turn the rotating platform, control the operation of raising, lowering and extending the contraction of the boom to achieve the desired aerial location. This enables the operator to work in the desired aerial location. 21, the operation control device, which executes the control of movement, is described. It's provided with a rotation angle sensor. So that's the angle around the vertical axis. A hoist angle sensor, which is the angle of the arm. An extension sensor, how far out the arm is extended. An axial tension sensor, which detects the axial tension. And as Professor Plummer pointed out in his evidence, it must mean pressure, because tension is obviously inappropriate for a hydraulic pressure cylinder. And a load sensor 25, which detects the load on the work platform. So being further provided with a controller 20, to which the detection signals from these sensors input. Can I just take you briefly to the drawing which shows that, which is, sorry, I've now lost it. figure 1, the controller 20 in the middle of that figure 1 on page 33 includes both the moment limitation and the working range limitation. So again, Aichi is saying movement of the arm is controlled or restricted at all times. It's just the specific calculation you perform that is changed.
What is the significance of the axial tension sensor? Axial pressure sensor?
Yes, I would call it a pressure sensor.
What's the point of that?
That
do
is
you
a
need
direct measure of the load on the boom because the amount of pressure you require to hold the boom up is directly related to the load on the platform and the angle of the boom.
Okay, thank you.
There are a variety of sensors you can use to measure the turning moment, the overturning moment.
Yep.
You can measure the extension of the arm, the load on the platform, and calculate it, or you can measure the pressure in the lifting cylinder, which is a direct measurement that combines both, basically.
This, looking at figure 1 and also paragraph 21, suggests that you have both. Is that a sort of belt and braces?
Sorry, I couldn't catch
It
that.
suggests that you have both. I mean,
Yes.
you've got both the axial sensor.
What I'm going to go on and show you is that it describes you can use either combination.
Yes, I see.
Basically, it says it's up to you which sensor you use to do what.
Yes.
Normal operation is described in 22 and 23. So this is just what happens when you operate the controls. The arm moves up and down, you can rotate the platform and so on. Can we pick it up at 24? An overturning prevention device is provided, which when aerial work is carried out, the boom operation device 27 to move the platform to the desired location with the operator on board, limits the movement of the work platform to ensure that the overturning movement varies in accordance with the movement of the work platform is kept within positional permissible moments that can be stably supported by front and rear wheels. As a structure, such as aerial work carried out by the moving work platform to desired aerial location through boom operation control can be done not only when the work platform is stationary but also in motion. Controller 20 is thus provided with a moment limitation device as an overturning prevention device for use when the vehicle is stationary, and a working range limitation device as an overturning prevention device for use when the vehicle is in motion. Again, I emphasise, it is a single controller, it's performing the same task, it's just using different inputs to determine when the safe working limit of moment has been reached. 25, it calculates the actual overturning moment, MR, acting on the vehicle body from boom 4 and work platform 10, based on the hoist angle data and the actual tension data from hoisting cylinder 5. It then detects rotational angle data from the rotational angle sensor, reads out the permissible moment MA set in advance according to the rotation angle installed, and compares the actual overturning moment MR with permissible moment MA. Outputs the signal to the control valve group 30, limits any operation of the boom for which the actual overturning moment MR exceeds the permissible moment MA. In this way, the operation of control valve group 30 is limited, limiting any operation of the boom actuator tending to increase the overturning moment. For example, extension of the logic of the boom, and forestalling the occurrence of a situation where stability is compromised due to actual overturning moment exceeding the permissible moment MA. Then, when moving in 26, work range limitation device finds the position of the work platform based on hoist angle data, extension data from the extension mount sensor, the range over which movement is possible, in other words, the permissible working range is set and stored in the work range limitation device 20B, with the overturning moment kept below the permissible moment when the work platform is carrying the rated load. So again, I emphasise that what it's doing is keeping the overturning moment below the permissible moment at rated load. Control signal output to the valve 30, group 30 to limit the movement for which work position as found would exceed the permissible working range. Thus, any boom operation which would move the work platform beyond the permissible working range is limited, forestalling the occurrence of a situation where stability is compromised. And then in 27, further describes what's happening in 27 and 28 when the machine is moving. And it's important to note that the text emphasises that the fact that stability is reliably maintained, whether the vehicle is stationary or moving. So the overturning device is in operation at all times. It is not disabled or switched off. It's just its method of operation is varied. 27 points out that the effect is that the working range limitation is more strict than it needs to be. And 28 says it switches between the two, enabling the widest possible working range to be set and the most appropriate control against overturning to be carried out. Then it talks about the motion detector means and that it switches between the two, and that's the switching means of the claim at the end of 28. 29 is important because it emphasises what it's trying to do and how to improve it. Although the permissible working range set by working range limitation device is set for a situation where the platform is carrying a rated load, it may also be set based on the overturning moment immediately prior to the start of movement. The overturning moment corresponds to the actual load on the work platform and thus enables the optimal permissible working range corresponding to the actual load on the work platform to be set. So it can be seen that Aichi is telling you two things. One, that's what I'm trying to do at all times. In other words, measure the actual overturning moment. And two, that instead of doing that, I can assess an overturning moment with a maximum load, which is not as effective because it restricts the movement more. The phrase immediately prior to...
Sorry, Mr. Sibley, if you were just showing me 29.
Yes.
That's 29, and you said that it shows that this is trying to measure the actual overturning moment.
Yes.
And I didn't see those words in the passage you're pointing to.
I'm sorry. The actual load on the work platform, which is used to determine the overturning moment. The phrase immediately prior to movement has, yes, the point is the optimal permissible working range corresponds to the actual load on the work platform, therefore the actual overturning moment. And sorry, in the previous sentence, the permissible, line 3, the permissible working range may be set based on the overturning moment immediately prior to the start of movement. So it is measuring that. And then it explains how it does it. Overturning immediately prior to movement has the meaning of immediately prior to the start of each movement. And for this reason, a memory is provided which continuously stores the updated overturning moment values. That is what it's measuring. And when movement begins, the overturning moment stored in the memory immediately prior to start is read out and the permissible working range set corresponding to this. Now, paragraph 30 is also important. In the above example, the overturning moment is calculated from the axial tension of the hoisting cylinder and the hoist angle, but it may also be calculated by detecting the load on the work platform using load sensor 25, and calculated from this and the height angle of the boom and the extension amount. That's exactly the approach that's taken when the machine is moving. If you go back to paragraph 26, you'll see it's using the same data with the measured load from the platform. When limiting the operation of the boom using moment limitation device 28, work range limitation device 20B, a warning is sounded. And 31, the load sensor may also constitute overload detecting limit switch, shown in figure 3, and that stops you putting more load on the platform than is permissible. there is then the summary paragraphs. 33 is important, although I confess I think it's fair to say it's repetitive. It should be noted that where the vehicle is in motion, limitation of the boom operation by the working range control means is preferably carried out with a permissible working range set based on the overturning moment acting on the vehicle immediately prior to the vehicle starting its movement. The overturning moment acting on the vehicle immediately prior to the start of movement can be accurately detected, as it is an overturning moment detected when the vehicle is stationary, and as this overturning moment corresponds to the actual load on the work platform. If the permissible working range is set based on the overturning moment detected immediately prior to the start of movement in this way, an optimum permissible working range can be set with safety ensured at this point. So what I say in simple terms is that conceptually what is being described is completely the opposite of what is described and claimed in the patent. Now, we say, the court will be aware from the skeleton argument, we say the judge misunderstood how the Aichi prior art works and wrongly concluded that it disabled the overturning prevention control when the platform is moving. He did not seem to have appreciated that the control remains in operation. He seems to have thought that because it uses positional sensors to determine the safe working limit when the machine is moving, it is doing something completely different. It is not clear why he thought that, particularly given what I've shown you in paragraph 30, that Aichi says exactly the same sensors may be used both when moving and when stationary. Now, the important point is that in order to reach his conclusion, the judge had to put the evidence of both experts aside because they are in agreement that the Aichi control system operates both when the vehicle is stationary and when it is moving.
Can you go back to, you said paragraph 30, so
Yes.
you use the same sensors when moving and
Yes.
stationary. I wasn't sure I saw that in paragraph 30.
Right, let me explain. What paragraph 30 is telling you is that what I told you earlier, there are two ways, at least two ways that you can determine the overturning moment. You can measure the position, the angle and extension of the arm and the load on the platform and calculate the overturning moment from that.
Yes.
Or you can measure what it calls the axial tension, but is in fact the pressure in the lifting cylinder, which combines both those measurements because the pressure required to lift the arm is dependent both on the extension of the arm and the load on the end of it. This is when stationary.
So that's what you do in stationary, I understand that.
Right?
Yes.
So what it's saying is that you can do it either way. And when it's moving, you use the extension and angle of the arm and a load. And in the preferred Aichi method, the load is the load that was measured by the load sensor 25 immediately before the machine started moving. So the actual load on the platform. In other words, it's doing exactly the same calculation when stationary and when moving, if you do it this way. The only difference between the operations is that the machine senses when it's moving and uses the load as measured from the memory immediately before movement while the machine is in motion, instead of continuously remeasuring it. But it's doing exactly the same calculation. That's my point. And the same measuring method. To suggest that my submission is very simple, to suggest that there's some fundamental change in the way the machine is operating when stationary moving misunderstands the disclosure.
Was there a point taken at the trial about the difference between the rated load method and the immediate prior load before movement method?
That's exactly what I cross-examined Mr. Graham about, as I'm about to show you. Because the point is that Mr. Graham understood perfectly what I was talking to him about, as I've explained it to you, and said, yes, what it's doing is what you described earlier as an envelope control system. It's using the preferred. And where I think the judge went wrong was he thought Mr. Graham and I were not ad idem at a point at which I said, you know, hang on, we'll get there. Whereas in fact, Mr. Graham and I were completely ad idem. We knew we each understood perfectly what we were talking about and went on to deal with the point he was about to raise.
Shall we look at that?
Shall we look at that?
It's easier than trying to remember what you said about it. Yes.
Right. Before moving to the evidence, there's one more thing I should explain in order to enable you to understand readily what follows. You will appreciate from what I have said that the control system in IECHE uses a rather more complicated method for evaluating whether the machine is in a configuration which puts it at risk of tipping over than the system used in a standard telehandler. The standard telehandler, because the machine is geometrically relatively simple, you just measure the load on the rear axle. With these rotatable booms, you have to make a number of measurements because the boom can be at any angle to the chassis, and so you measure the angle, the extension, the load, and all those things to make sure that you're controlling
the rotation.
Sorry?
And the rotation.
And the, yes, yeah, sorry, that's what I meant by angle, rotational angle. No, you're quite right. I meant vertical angle. You're quite right. You also have to remember the horizontal rotational angle. The simple system is generally called a longitudinal load moment control system, as used in telehandlers. And the sensor on the rear axle is often referred to as a tipping moment sensor. The tipping moment in a machine like IECHE with a rotatable body may be at any angle to the chassis. So you measure all those pieces of data, and you have in a table stored in the machine the safe positions to which the arm may be moved, how far it may be extended and raised at any particular rotational angle around the chassis and any particular load. So there's a table of safe values. What I call that is an envelope control system, because the table gives you a safe working envelope within which the loaded arm may be moved and prevents it from moving outside the envelope. It allows you to go to the limits of the envelope but no further. And you'll see that in IECHE at paragraphs 25 and 30, which I've just shown, exactly what it's doing. And it's specifically described in paragraph 25. You'll recall there's a table against which you look at the value. Now, in order to understand the discussion and the evidence that I had with Mr. Crane, you need to know, as I've just said, that I called this method of assessing the safe working envelope by the shorthand term envelope control, to distinguish it from the direct measurement of rear axle load or tipping moment used in a conventional telehandler system. And you will see in the evidence there was a debate between me and Mr. Crane as to whether such a name was appropriate. But what there was not was a dispute or misunderstanding between us as to how these things work. That is why when Mr. Crane gave the answers he did in response to my questions to him about how IECHE works, there is in my submission no doubt that he understood precisely what I was putting to him, and that his agreement to what I was putting was both informed and correct. And if that is so in my submission, the judge fell into error in determining that Mr. Crane didn't understand what he was agreeing. And it also follows that if Mr. Crane was correct to agree what he did, it is consequently clear that IECHE does not do what the claims of 965 require.
Just before you go any further, Mr. Silverleaf, you said a minute ago that envelope control system is what is described in 25 of DIECHE.
Yes.
25 of DIECHE, as I've understood it, is the stationary control
Yes.
system. And what it describes is, I thought, the same as the system in the example in your patent.
No,
Okay.
because it's got stored. If you go back to 25, hoist angle,
Stored.
sorry,
It measures.
it measures hoist angle, axial tension, which is the pressure in the cylinder, rotational angle, and reads out the permissible moment set in advance according to the rotational angle and stored.
Quite right. The rotational angle aspect
Yes.
is different, but for a rotation, for when there's no rotation, when it's a longitudinal only thing, this is the same as the patent,
Right.
isn't it?
But the point I was making to you about 30 is it can do exactly the same thing with the load and the angle, vertical angle and extension of the boom.
But just before we get to 30,
Yeah.
because what foxed me was that you said that envelope control was 25. Now, that's what you said.
Yes.
As I understand 25 in a context in which there's no rotation, no rotational angle, but it's all longitudinal, that is the same as the example in the patent. Measuring the actual overturning moment and comparing it with some predetermined permissible maximum.
Yeah, yes, but what you have to remember when you say that is that there is a rotational angle involved.
Right.
It just happens to be 0.
Yes, okay.
So you're only using a little bit of the table. There is a stored table of values.
Right.
Now, if you use the method in 30, it is very clear that even if the angle is always 0, the horizontal rotation angle is always 0. The vertical rotation angle, extension and load must have a set of stored values beyond which you cannot go.
Well, there's a moment that must be stored.
There's a moment that's generated from those values.
If you generate a moment, and if the moment's bigger than the preset moment, then you can't go.
No. But so there are stored values beyond which you, for the moment, beyond which you cannot go.
I understand, but at the moment I'm not understanding why calling that an envelope is helping. It's just all you're doing is measuring. You're working out the instantaneous moment and comparing it to a moment.
Yes. When I was discussing it with Mr. Graham, we were assuming that the machine could also rotate.
Okay.
So you're right. In the simplified version, the table is very simple. Yeah. And the envelope is in fact a line. Yeah. It's a two-dimensional envelope. Sorry, a one-dimensional envelope.
Right, whatever.
But in the real world, it's a three-dimensional envelope. But the debate between me and Mr. Graham was simply, is it appropriate to call it an envelope where it can vary according to the load on the platform? Because the outer limit of the envelope will depend on the load as well as the angle, extension and rotation of the arm. And that was the debate between us. And I'll take you through the evidence. Can I start with Professor Plummer? Because Professor Plummer was cross-examined, and you will see in my submission that he was not cross-examined into accepting what the judge said he accepted. Supplementary bundle, tab 5, page 120. At 6.7, he explains what he understands the invention to be. Turn the control system off when the machine is moving, so that the operator can move the lifting arm at will, as the specification explains. And he picks that up right at the end of the paragraph. He points out, as I showed you earlier, the conventional approach would be to eliminate or filter out rogue signals, and that this is counterintuitive. So can we now go to his discussion of Aichi at 6.17, because this is the comparison. In that passage from 6.17 to 6.30, he describes rather more eloquently and in rather more detail how Aichi works than the way I've just taken you through. But the thrust of what he says is substantially the same as what I've described to you. And at 6.31, he starts discussing the question of novelty, And at 32 and 33, he makes a number of points of distinction. And they don't arise on the appeal. The critical evidence is at 634. The most striking difference between 965 and what he's describing in Aichi is that in contrast to the method described in claim 965, Aichi does not disclose disabling the moment control system when the machine is determined to be travelling at a speed above the threshold speed. Rather, when the controller of Aichi detects the machine's in motion, it switches from a moment limitation mode to a working range control mode. The working range control system is just as much a moment control system as the moment limitation system. In fact, Aichi achieves precisely the opposite of 965. Instead of disabling the moment control system when the machine is moving, it switches to a more restrictive control system, which limits the movement of and therefore the moment caused by the boom to a greater extent than the control system it uses when the machine is stationary. So his evidence in chief was therefore that the system was not disabled when the machine moves in Aichi. The cross-examination on this is in the transcript at tab 9, page 246 of the bundle. And it starts on, so it starts at page 244, top right hand of page 163 of the transcript. You'll see the end of the question from Mr. Nicholson. It's a document we're calling Aichi 1, does that ring a bell? And we can pick it up at the top of page 246 on page 168, because I don't think there's anything of any significance before that. Page 168 of the transcript. He's being asked in that long question on page 168 of the transcript about what Aichi means in paragraph 7. And picking it up at 16, the point that Aichi is making, is it not, Professor, is that whilst one can theoretically propose filtering or other similar techniques to damp out vibrations in a noisy sensor, getting such a system to work properly in practice without affecting responsiveness of the control system or even leading to instability as a result of time lag or whatever in control loop can be difficult. Would you agree? Yes, I think the implication here, with which I agree, is that the natural approach would be to try to filter the signals or modify the signals in some way to eradicate those parts of them you do not want because they're due to vibration, rather than the fundamental stability measurement you're trying to get at. But there are difficulties in applying those sort of natural methods because they do introduce delays into the control system, and possibly along with filtering out the noise, you filter out the signal as well that you want, so it's difficult. It's particularly a problem when, for example, you're trying to take out vibrations caused by a lump in the ground, a ditch, as opposed to, say, the vibration noise from the hydraulic pump, which has a nice regular signal that you can tune, it helps you to tune a narrow filter. That is true. The bigger difficulty would be the frequency at which the lower frequency bump type variation would be harder to filter out than the higher frequency, because you're more interested in the slow signals, the lower frequency changes which are related to stability. And then we get to the critical passage. That's the next 2 and a bit pages. I think you accept Aichi's solution, as we've seen in the abstract, is to have a sensor-based cutout system for use when the machine is stopped for accurate measurement of, I will use the generalized term, tipping moment is easy to measure. Agreed. Yes, a moment-based system used when it is stationary. Question, we have a sensor-free solution, if I can put it that way, which is used when the vehicle is in motion, which avoids the need to take any measurement while the vehicle is moving or clean up any measurements that we have taken, and therefore avoids the vibration problem. Answer, no. It is using positional measurements instead of load measurements. Question, yes, but sorry, it is not trying to measure the stability of the machine with a measurement on the boom sensors or similar. Answer, it is not measuring load, it is measuring position. Yes, I'm grateful. Then in order to apply the right stability system in accordance with this design, Aichi detects having a motion detector to decide whether the vehicle is stationary or in motion, and then switching one system off and the other on and vice versa as often and when required. Agreed? Yes. Can you just turn to the main figure of Aichi for me, which is in the middle of the tab, and then take judge to it, and they're going to figure 1. Top of page 171. Just what we can see here, we have here, right in the middle, is a box 20 controller, which within it has 2 separate parts, the moment limitation part and the work limitation part. Agreed? Yes? Feeding into the controller at the top is the movement operation which the controller uses to tell it whether we're moving or stationary. Yes? On the right-hand side, there is a brief, highly schematic outline of the hydraulics, but nothing about the hydraulics part of Aichi's new teaching. Is that fair? Correct? On the left-hand side, we have a collection of all the sensors that Aichi has available to work out whether the specific vehicle he is considering is in a safe and stable position. Yes, okay. Yes, so it includes the boom lift angle, the boom rotation angle, the boom extension, axial tension means the hydraulic cylinder pressure in a slightly strange terminology. I think the load sensor is measuring the force or weight on the platform specifically as well. But how exactly to go about measuring stability or working range is not really what Aichi is about. It is about what it is really about teaching is how to avoid the inaccuracy from trying to use sensors that are subject to the vibrational forces when the vehicle is, I think that should be moving. Would that be fair? Answer, yes. And that's the end of the cross-examination. Now, in my respectful submission, Professor Plummer did not resile from anything he said in paragraph 6 point. Sorry, I've forgotten which paragraph it was now.
31?
34.
34.
It was never put to him that there was no control system when the vehicle was moving. In fact, quite the opposite was being put to him. But if we now look at what the judge says, he didn't agree the system was sensor-free. He didn't agree that it was not determining overturning moment, or indeed anything. He didn't agree anything else that might make the Aichi system not enabled when the machine is moving. The explanation he gave in paragraph 634 of his evidence on sheet was untouched by these questions. If we go to paragraph 86 of the judgment, which is tab 6 of the core bundle of page 64, sorry, tab 3 of the core bundle. No, tab 6, I beg your pardon. The judge sets out what the Aichi specification says. And then says, when the vehicle, and 86 says, when the vehicle starts to move, the control over arm movement switches from moment limitation to working range limitation. I find it impossible to interpret this in any other way than that the moment limitation device is disabled when the vehicle starts to move. In his evidence in chief, Professor Plummer said that it did not constitute disablement, but in cross-examination he accepted that when the Aichi machine was in motion, the moment limitation device was switched off. I think that is plainly correct and this amounts to disablement of the moment limitation device. In my respectful submission, you simply cannot get that out of what Professor Plummer said. He didn't accept that there was no moment limitation device, that it was switched off. It just changes the way it works. And in 634, he's absolutely clear that it's a moment limitation device when the machine is moving. He was not cross-examined to challenge that piece of evidence.
Doesn't it depend what you mean by moment limitation device? Because he does agree, doesn't he, that the moment limitation device, as distinct from the work range limitation device.
Yes.
He does agree.
In 634, he says they're both moment limitation devices.
Is that what 634 says?
Yes.
Let's just have a look at that.
634 is tab 6, I think, of the supplementary bundle. No, tab 5. At page 126. Right in the middle of the paragraph.
He's talking about he says there it switches from a moment limitation mode to a working range mode.
And then he says the working range control system is just as much a moment control system as the moment limitation system.
Right. Well, the judge didn't say moment control system. He said moment limitation system.
Well, there's no difference with respect. They're both designed to control the tipping moment.
You're saying the judge had no basis for what he said. The judge least it seems to me, Mr. Silverleaf, the judge had a plain basis for what he said, which is the cross-examination was referring to moment limitation device, and that's what was put to the witness.
Yes.
The witness agreed it was swapped between that and the working range control device.
Well, I'm
Now,
sorry.
the
Maybe
question, the issue is they may both be moment control systems.
Yes.
That's your case.
Yes.
That's not what the judge is saying in the paragraph you're criticising.
I'm sorry. In which case, what I should have said is the judge is clearly treating moment limitation and moment control as coterminous.
Right.
And he was wrong to do that.
Okay. And was that put to him in closing or anything?
What was put to the judge was that there was a moment control system operating in Aichi throughout.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
no, I can't. I don't have a window into the judge's mind as to how he understood what I said to him.
That wasn't the question I asked you, Mr. Silverleaf, but all right.
Thank you.
Can we go back to the cross-examination?
Yes.
Page 170.
Hold on.
So that's on page 246 of the document.
Yes.
Line 13. Aichi teaches having a motion detector to decide whether the vehicle is stationary or in motion and then switching one system off and the other one on. And that's agreed.
Yes. There's no dispute about that.
So there's there the idea of switching a system off. And then if we drop down to 171, with two separate parts, the moment limitation part and the work range limitation part agreed.
Sorry, where are you looking on?
Sorry, line 4
4.
of 171.
Yes.
Two separate parts, the moment limitation part and the work range limitation part. Agreed.
Yes.
And why can you not regard that, as the judge has done, as saying that it was agreed that the you have one system switched off and the other one switched on, and we've got these two separate parts, one labelled moment limitation and one labelled work range limitation. What's wrong with saying he accepted that when the Aichi machine was in motion, the moment limitation device was switched off? Because so he's accepted that one system is switched off, and he's also accepted the labels, whichever labels used in Aichi, of moment limitation and work range limitation.
But he has right. The problem is what the judge means. He must mean, or his conclusion makes no sense, is that there's no moment control operating. Because if he doesn't mean that, in my respectful submission, he hasn't understood what the issue is. The issue is whether the moment is controlled when the machine is moving.
Mr. Silverleaf, that's why I asked you about the closing. Now, you then told me about the judge's mind. Well, I agree with you. We can't know what the judge's mind is. But what I was wondering about was whether the distinction you're now drawing was put to the judge in closing.
It was front and centre of my case. It had to be.
Okay.
Well, our whole point was there is a control system which operates in Aichi whether the machine is stationary or moving. I mean, do you need me to show you the argument? I can assure you it was put. It was my case. It's the case I'm running here.
Well, you take your course, as they say, Mr. Silverleaf. You do that. But you're drawing a distinction between two phrases which are very similar to each other, but they're not the same. And it just struck me that whether it would be interesting to understand whether the distinction you're now drawing between, essentially, if I can put it this way, raising a finger and saying, now be very careful, a moment limitation device isn't the same thing as a moment control device. And
Okay.
I don't know, I wasn't there, and neither was Ms. Edwards Stewart. But it would certainly help me if I saw that this distinction that you're now drawing was being put. And it's up to you.
It is the distinction made by Professor Plummer in paragraph 634. That evidence was specifically relied on. And in my respectful submission, the judge ought to have been in no doubt that our case was that there was a moment control system operating in Aichi, whether stationary or moving. It's precisely the point made by Professor Plummer in 634. The idea that it wasn't put to the judge or wasn't part of our case is inconsistent with that evidence.
Okay.
And it's notable that Professor Plummer was not cross-examined. I've taken you to the relevant passage of the transcript. And you've got the whole of Aichi in those few pages. And bear in mind that the final question and answer at the bottom of page 246 of the bundle 171 of the transcript, where it was put to Professor Plummer exactly how to go about measuring stability of working ranges, not what Aichi is really about. It's about teaching how to avoid inaccuracy and trying to use sensors that are subject to vibrational forces. In other words, the question assumes that Professor Plummer is essentially right in paragraph 634. And unsurprisingly, Professor Plummer agrees with it. We'll now turn to Mr. Crane. I asked him how Aichi worked in the passage which is quoted almost in full by the judge in paragraphs 87 and 88 of the judgment. Before we look at that, I need to take you to the passage where we had the debate about the term envelope control system. And that's in tab 10 of the supplementary bundle, starting at page 289. And we were talking about a particular Manitou machine which uses a particular kind of controller, the 3B6, halfway down page 397 of the transcript. The 3B6 is used in the machine in the next exhibit. And I take him to his exhibit, DRK 20, about the maniscopic MRT machine.
I'm sorry, which page are we?
289 of the bundle,
289,
supplementary bundle,
Thank you.
bottom right-hand quadrant.
Yep.
Just over halfway down the page at line 30.
36p, yes.
Machine, as I put to him, is a machine that combines three functions: material handling, lifting of loads, and lifting of people. And we had a little discussion while he found it. And then over on page 399 of the transcript, starting at the top of the page. The MRT range complies with the current standards for telescopic equipment, mobile cranes, as well as for people carrier platforms. Yes. I've read out another passage. The MRT is equipped with a load moment limited Manitou safety system capable of storing specific diagrams for each mounted accessory. It analyses the weight and position of the load in the space and identifies the configuration of the machine's work, compares the set of data with the load diagrams stored. Overloading causes automatic interruption of aggregating moments. Do you see all that? Yes. That tells us that actually the 3B6 system allows it to be certified under 145915. So that should be 1500, 000, EN 280, and at that date EN 13000 it should be. Answer: we are in agreement. Good. That is a full crane load moment system with an envelope control. Is it not? It is a full crane telehandler system, yes, but it has no axle sensor, right? And it does not measure the longitudinal load moment. It is measuring the load on the boom because the boom can rotate about the chassis, so you need to measure the load on the boom. Answer: it measures the boom moment and calculates the machine load moment. The overall load moment, yes. What it actually does, it has a map of permitted boom movements, does it not? It does, stored in a lookup table. Answer: conversely, it has a map of permissible positions at whatever. Sorry, it has a map which shows the permissible loads and I interrupt at whatever position, and the witness carried on, at whatever position the boom is at that point. A nice comprehensive term for it is an envelope control, because it maps the safe working envelope and checks whether the machine is within that safe working envelope at all points, all positions and loads. And if the machine tries to exceed that safe working envelope, it cuts out further movement. That is what it says, does it not? And this is where we get into the debate about what an envelope control is. When you say envelope, my interpretation of it is the fixed envelope when you are not measuring stability. So although this may be an envelope, it is still a stability envelope. There is a slight emphasis in envelope to envelope. Question, could you, just to make life simpler, accept the use of the term envelope for a machine measuring stability by reference to the position of load on the boom? You can have a working envelope which is completely defined irrespective of the load on the boom, yes? Or you can have a working envelope which is determined by the boom load and the boom position. Both of those are envelope control systems because they have a map in them which the EC uses to determine whether the machine is inside or outside the safe working envelope. The basic principle is the same. It is just one measures the actual moment, the other uses an assumed moment. I cannot fully agree that, because if you take this Manitou machine with the controller, you take a certain load, I think the controller could stop it there. Sorry, the controller could stop it maybe there or maybe there. If the load was different, he was using positions of his hand to illustrate different positions. The envelope is different. Yes, I think you're trying to say this has the same envelope, which is that, but the envelope is all over the place depending on what the load is. At which point I realised what the misunderstanding was. Okay, I see what you're saying. Again, I don't think there's anything between us, Mr. Crane. It's just a matter of language and communication. I'm quite happy to agree that we do not agree with the definition of envelope, however, because I cannot agree with what you are actually saying. Okay, when we come to some of the prior art, I will be putting to you that it is an envelope control based on measured moment as opposed to calculated safe moment for any particular position. And okay, basically, I do not think there's anything between us apart from linguistics. I'm sorry if I'm being pedantic, but I'm not being pedantic because of any forward-looking aspect of the case. I'm being pedantic because of my engineering understanding in terms of experience. The judge intervened, and there was a discussion about using engineering terms. I pick it up at the bottom of 402. I want to see if we can at least arrive at an agreed terminology so I can ask you the rest of the questions, because we're going to have the same problem with everything I show you. Do you agree with me that the system that's being used in Exhibit 20 maps the safe load on the boom for every position of the boom angle and extension? That is what's stored in the map table. Yes. It checks the measured load for the position, the rotating position. Yes. The angle and extension of the boom. Yes. Against that map table. Yes. Determines whether or not it's within or outside the safe working limit. Yes. I am calling that an envelope. Okay. I cannot see any reason not to, because that is what it is. My response to that is please draw me the envelope of that system. It has not got a fixed envelope. Question, it does have a fixed envelope because it determines whether the boom position, angle, extension, vertical rotation around the chassis and load, all of which are measured, are they not? Yes. Are within the safe working limit table. Would you accept safe working limit table? Certainly yes. Okay, we'll call it a safe working limit table. What you describe as an envelope control system is one where that safe working limit is defined solely by the position of the boom. Yes, irrespective of the load. You have to have an assumed load. With an envelope system, you could pick one load and you would give it a scope of movement. Question, yes? Okay, basically you assume it's the load on the boom and you calculate everything in accordance with that. That's what you're calling an envelope system. Can we call that one? Can we call one that measures the load a safe working limit system? Are you happy with that terminology? So safe working limit system which maps boom, load, and determines whether it is within the safe working limit. Yes. Same system is used. Sorry, the same kind of system is used and was routinely used on cranes for many years because that's how you certify a crane. Answer yes. So what I want you to take out of that is we had a debate about what an envelope control system is, and what I was calling an envelope control system included both one with a predetermined load and one without. So when you come to the passage we're about to look at, that's what Mr. Crane meant. So can we now go to the key passage? We might as well look at it in the transcript, which starts at 499 on page 315 of the file. This is with the omission of a single answer. I think this is quoted in full by the judge.
Sorry, what was the reference again? Just to-
Page 315, tab 10 of the supplementary bundle. You're an electronic document.
Oh, no, I've got it.
No. So if I give you a page number, that's okay, isn't it? Now, picking it up at the bottom of 499, line 24, can we go to Aichi? I put to him, it's a MUP mounted on a turret, rotates about a vertical axis. We see that in figure 2. And we have a little discussion about figure 2 because I've, as usual, lost my way in the papers. Monitors the position of the load on the boom and compares what is measuring with a lookup table containing mapped values which are quoting paragraph 25 set in advance. Yes. It switches. That is what it does when it is stationary. Yes. When it moves, it switches to a system using the same methodology, but using a map which assumes the maximum loading of the platform when the machine is moving. It does, but not only. It has the preferable way. And that's where I interrupted him. I will get there. Okay. It's the okay that's not picked up by the judge, I think. That is what is described in 26 and 27. Yes, okay. In 33, instead of using the maximum, it uses the last measured value. Yes. But in each case, the control system is operating in exactly the same way, using a map and a safe working limit. It is just that the criterion it uses to determine the safe working limit depends upon whether the machine is stationary when it uses the measured values, or moving when it can use either the presumed maximum load or the last measured load. Yes. Otherwise, there is no difference between the way it operates when stationary and moving. That is answer. That is right. I think that is what you were referring to this morning as an envelope control. There is in my submission not a shred of doubt, not a shadow of doubt, that Mr. Graham knew exactly what he was saying and what he was agreeing with. He knew precisely what I was calling an envelope control. I put to him that it worked the same way when moving and stationary. And I didn't even put to him it's an envelope control. He came back to me and said, that's what you were calling an envelope control. He knew exactly what he was agreeing to. And I went on to say, and you could apply this to a telehandler. And he agreed that you could do that, controlling boom movement, whether the machine was stationary or moving, just changing the safe working limit. That was it.
Are the references at line 3? Is that
On
line
page?
3? Sorry, in the transcript at 501.
Yes.
Line 3, when you say that's what's described at 26 and 27.
Yes.
That's right, is it?
That's the preferred way, using the last measured load. Mr. Crane and I were completely ad idem. The judge, for some reason, thinks that I interrupted him and stopped his flow. In fact, we were going in...
I'm just trying to wonder, I don't remember it being 26 and 27.
I'm pretty sure it is. Let me just double check.
27 said anything other than 26 said anything other than rated load.
Can you just hold on a moment? Yes, 26 and 27 are where the working range control system is initially described. And then there's the extra description in 33. But I think I got the right paragraphs.
Okay. So it's the working range system is what you're talking about?
Yes, because what we're talking about at that point in the transcript is he says it has the preferable way. We just started talking at the bottom of 501 at line 23, when the machine is moving. It does, but not only, it has the preferable way.
So 26 and 27 is using the maximum loading.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're quite right.
33 is using the preferred
I
way.
did get the wrong paragraphs, you're absolutely right. In 33,
It's the last measured value.
it's the last measured value. So 26 and 27 is the maximum, 33 is the last measured value.
That's why you say, "Oh, we'll get there," because you were taking him through
26
last
and 27.
measured value, 26 and 27.
No. Presumed.
Sorry,
maximum.
presumed maximum.
Yeah.
Maximum loading, 26 and 27. Last measured value, 33.
I was taking him step by step.
And he just jumped ahead.
Yeah, he just jumped ahead because he knew exactly where I was going for obvious reasons.
When you say in each case, are you talking about the difference between the rated load and the last measured value?
No, stationary and moving.
Right. I see, because it then goes on and says
Stationary uses measured values,
Yeah.
moving uses presumed maximum or last measured.
Yeah.
yes.
Otherwise, there's no difference.
And in my respectful submission, Mr. Crown clearly understood exactly what we were talking about. And it's the reference to what that is what you were referring to this morning as an envelope control, which makes it absolutely clear that he didn't like that term, but he knew what I meant.
But this doesn't say, and you agree they're both moment control systems, does it? Show me if it does, Mr. Silverleaf.
No, it doesn't. But
So what is it? But you're not putting here, as far as I can see, the point that they are both moment control systems. What you're putting is that they have these distinctions, and as you put it, they work in exactly the same way. Well, and that's true and also not true. They work in a sense, they work in exactly the same way as the witness was happy to accept, but in a sense, as your question in a sense is there. They're not actually exactly the same. They're different from each other.
But
That's
it's
the whole point of them.
with respect, Lord, it is the underlying basis of the discussion is that they're limiting the moment, just using different inputs to do it.
I mean, it would certainly help me if you showed me where you put that to the witness.
Let me. Well, if you read the passage I've just shown you,
Right.
I put to him the geometry of the machine. And I put to him that it has a conventional safe working movement control system.
Described in paragraphs 21 and 25. That's the
Monitors the position of the load on the beam and compares what it is measuring with a lookup table containing mapped values, which are quoting paragraph 25.
That's what, and you say that's what it does when it's
But
stationary.
There's no dispute that that is a moment control system. And I then put to him that when it's stationary and moving, it's doing exactly the same thing. So although I didn't use the words, it is a moment control system, he agreed with me it was doing the same thing when moving as when stationary. So
isn't that the crucial question? I mean, you never use the word moment at all, do you?
No, I don't think we do. We use load.
Sure.
But I mean, and the load drives the moment.
Yes.
Because as Aichi says, the measured load is equivalent to the moment. Sorry, I've been given some instructions. Page 100. Doesn't say it's a moment control.
Is an LMC.
Where does it say that? Oh, I see, yes. It's been pointed out to me that he had already accepted it was an LMC in his evidence in chief.
Okay.
Tab 7, page 190, paragraph 325. At the end, fully comply with the requirements of EN 15000, additionally providing an optimised LMC during machine movement. So I didn't actually need to put that. 325 at the top of page 190.
This is 325.
Yeah. The skilled person knew of LMCs when the machine was in motion. So a system which took account of switched off the load moment limitation system when moving, but replaced it with a range limitation system would have been of real interest to the skilled person and would fully comply with the requirements of EN 15000. Additionally, providing an optimised LMC during machine movement. What the skilled person would do with Aichi 1 is what he's describing.
And where does the witness define LMC?
It's a load moment control. I don't think there's any dispute about that. So he in chief said it was a load moment control. Or what I was putting to him was the detail. And I therefore say that when the judge found that Mr. Graham didn't understand what I was putting to him in paragraph 89 of the judgment, he was simply wrong. Top of page 66 of tab 6 of the core bundle. I do not believe that Mr. Graham correctly understood what he was being asked to accept. The judge's conclusion must be based on what he says at the beginning of paragraph 88. It's on page 65 of the core bundle. Here he suggests I cut off Mr. Graham when he was going to correct my explanation of what was happening. I hope I've shown you, by taking you through the transcript, that the judge is wrong about that. Mr. Graham and I were going down exactly the same path, it's just he was going faster than I was. So,
But if that's what Mr. Kramer's evidence in chief was, why was there a contest?
because it was being argued that that was within the claim. There was a novelty argument which was abandoned. But what was being said was that would lead you to the claim. It involves a misinterpretation of the claim in our submission. Now, what I was putting to Mr. Graham wasn't complicated or difficult to understand, particularly for an engineer. He demonstrated himself to be a highly intelligent and articulate witness who readily understood concepts of considerable mechanical complexity. You will have seen that from the debate we had about envelope control. The idea that he did not understand this is, with respect to the judge, unrealistic. Now, the judge went on, so I can finish in about a minute, if I'm allowed to.
Do continue.
Yes. The judge at 90 said he found Professor Plummer's evidence in cross-examination on how HE1 works clear and convincing. As I've said, it doesn't actually touch what he said in chief. Mr. Graham was then muddled. Answer, he wasn't. And he says, I accept Professor Plummer's evidence, but he's ignored paragraph 634 of the evidence in chief. And the fact that the key proposition in 634 is not even challenged. The moment limitation device may be disabled, may be switched over to a working range control, but that is as much a moment control device as the moment limitation device. So in my respectful submission, it follows that the evidence of both experts was that Aichi does not disable its moment control system when the machine moves. It keeps the system in operation and uses a method of load measurement which eliminates the possibility of false readings provided by vibration. It is the complete opposite of what is claimed in 965, where the control system is turned off when the machine moves, allowing the telehandler arm to be operated without restriction and at will. We therefore submit that the judge's conclusion that Aichi renders the claim of the patent obvious is wrong and should be reversed. Now, we're extremely grateful to the controller for being here, but as I see it, the controller is simply following the same line as the judge. So, subject to any brief points in reply, I don't propose to deal separately with the controller's argument, if that's acceptable to the court. Sorry, I'm slightly over time,
But you finished.
I've finished.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, 2 o'clock.
directive